Saturday or Sunday, either one.
Along the way, I was giving a quick summary as far as our zoning project, and wanting to make sure that we could have an ongoing dialogue. So hopefully either I'll get a call back quickly and talk to the person I left a message with to then at least relay back to the committee as far as a definite voice to move forward and provide feedback. Maren, you may have to just take off the mute for the webcam so that at least if you use that as the main microphone, it should be able to pick up the room.
You'll have to find access to that.
So I guess what I was going to say, Joe, is you feel pretty confident that you're with the right department?
Correct. Yep.
Good. Okay. Okay, well, that's good. I guess keep us posted.
Yep.
Anybody else have anything new? Lauren, anything new to report?
I can't hear Maren.
Did anybody have a chance to review the minutes? I did not either. I'm sorry. I didn't realize they were up. Mark, did you? No? Okay.
Maren, I can't hear you. Could you turn on your mic?
Yeah, I'll try that.
Yeah, I think if everyone has their mic off, but then using the webcam, I think then anyone listening through the webcam should be able to hear everyone.
Okay.
Yep, I can hear you, Delisa. So, yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Matt is in this meeting is not shared.
What are you having?
I don't have to answer that question.
No, thanks. Oh, really? What kind of gummy bears? No, I'm good.
Martin's.
Okay. So at 5:30, we have retail plans, correct?
Correct. Let's see, where did we leave off? Last Affordable Housing Trust meeting. Oh, they haven't had one. It'll just next week. That's right. And Mark, you were going to talk about Cindy's email about funding for.
Oh, yeah, so we talked to Cindy at a meeting with Hyannis and Cindy the other day. We talked about how much money we have left in all the different accounts that we can use towards this and towards, and it's too bad Chuck's not here to have to check about it. So maybe hiring a consultant to work with us. We thought that probably the best person we could think of would be the president, the town administrator. You know, there's a fair amount of people in the state. We could probably get state out here to take a look at what we're trying to do. So the thought was to use some of the money for the consultants that where we are and the hire Keith also facilitate what we're trying to do with the state. So we have about 22,000 right now.
Correct.
The
Yeah.
numbers in the budget accounts that are all tied between this and the master plan. So
Yeah, master plan and implementation and affordable housing work and.
So that's the thought. Just keep, you know, it was great when he was the administrative assistant about getting, helping to get us funds and helping to get us funds back. So the thought was to maybe have that as help.
And we feel like we can't get that help from our state representatives?
Well, it's somebody that has the time and the contacts to make that happen.
Excuse me, Maren,
Yes, Lucia?
I cannot hear. Um,
Can't hear Mark?
I can't hear Mark and I can hardly hear Delisa, very lightly.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll speak louder.
Is that better?
One of the things is I noticed when Mark, when you're talking to Delisa, because the webcam has the microphone, you're sort of then facing away. So it's almost like all the comments should probably be directed physically towards Maren, so that the microphone can pick it up.
I'll try to do that. So, to recap, the thought was to try to ask people to be interested in helping us facilitate getting the state involved with infrastructure, grants, whatever we can try to get out of them for the train station, for that area down there. We have 22,000 left in our buckets, different buckets. So we have enough probably to hire a consultant and maybe get Keith on board a little bit. To at least make the introductions and maybe the thought was to have a meeting out here with the state, get everybody involved, and maybe out at the train station so we can show them what we're talking about. You know, the grand idea is to try to get a ramp coming up out, but that's never gonna happen.
But, yeah,
If we bring them out there and they see,
right.
who knows?
Do you think Keith's role is to make sure things don't go off the rails, or is it to sort of find us money or opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise? Or both?
Actually, probably more of the latter than the first one, because he's been, how long is he here? 15, 18 years?
14 years.
14 years, he had a great rapport, he got, he was in Boston, the state, and, you know, as you're aware, Littleton's now the poster child of this, you know, commuter rail station stuff. We're right in the middle of everybody's bullseye. And Keith could probably push open a lot more doors than anybody else from his dealings with 14 years out there.
I think that would certainly be useful, because we know, we keep saying that, oh, nobody has any money. But we know there's money out there. It's just knowing, like you said, what doors to open. So,
I was just bringing him up to speed about talking about Keith Bergman on as a consultant.
I mean, I don't know how much, you know, but.
So one additional idea, especially if we're dealing with the property owners adjacent to the train station, we could come up with a memorandum of agreement with that property owner for basically assisting and funding some of the design work for zoning, which then would go to benefit them. When we did rezoning effort in Wayland for the town center project, we did that exact same thing, so that there was some state funds we were using, but then also some was essentially as a gift, with specifying that it was being provided without any expectation as far as any benefit, just to address development of the zoning. So that would be something that we could also look at, depending on what we needed for a delta, for supplementing the money that we do have.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So that's my update, that's all I know.
So we do have the ETL team ready whenever we are. Mhm.
That's good.
Okay, so let's welcome the ETL group. Jesse, how are you? Pam?
Hi, Lisa. Hi, everyone.
Good to hear you. Let me see you. I can mostly hear you. It's good to see you.
All yours.
Okay, great. I can get started. I'll share my screen here.
Let us know when you can see Jesse's screen.
Should be a PowerPoint.
Yep.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesse Yang. I'm an urban designer at UTL. Tim Love here is one of the principals. And we're also have Lisa Hollywood joining us, my colleague at UTL. So thank you to Mara and Lisa for inviting us back to sort of give our kind of proposed approach for design guidelines at the Littleton station area. I'll just kind of run through some of our proposed approach and also show some examples of what that might look like and what the process might be. This is just all for discussion. Please feel free to chime in with questions.
Yeah, this is meant to be a fairly open-ended conversation because we've had, exactly 1.5 conversations about this already, and we're just sharing with you maybe a way in to think about how we scope this, how involved or not it is. I was listening in on the tail end of your conversation about participation by affected property owners or not, and I think that we can just continue that conversation.
I'll get it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you recognize us, Tim and I and our code expert, Dan Bartman, worked on the form-based code for the Littleton Village Common area. We are both architects and also urban designers and planners at UTL. One of the things that we specialize in is design guidelines. These are just kind of 4 examples pulled from more recent projects: Boston Complete Streets, Hyannis Village Main Street zoning update. These would be guidelines for both the public realm and the private realm. The Hyannis Village Main Street zoning update is not dissimilar to our work on the form-based code for the Village Common. And on the bottom right, coastal flood resilience design guidelines protecting buildings in Boston from future flood risks that are currently in the floodplain. On the bottom left, kind of a neighborhood development guideline looking at both streets and also buildings and their use and bulk. So again, as you know, we worked on the Village Common form-based code. The similarity here to the design guidelines for this Littleton station area is that's going to be both with reference to a specific geographic area. And attached to that would be a set of codes and guidelines that would have both qualitative and quantitative regulations with respect to dimensions, building heights, street width, etc. There will be, of course, nuance to, or there will be differences to how a form-based code versus design guidelines are ultimately kind of codified and reinforced, but the design thinking behind them are very similar. They all kind of look at regulating and specifying the placement of buildings, how high, how tall or sort of bulky buildings might be, where uses should be located, front entrances, different scales, as well as a couple of other things. So these are just some examples we're pulling from previously and some of the thinking that we had around where buildings should be located, that they should be close to the street, parking should be at the rear, playing out some of these across multiple lots, what they might aggregate to look like across adjacent lots. So again, this is to say that a lot of the work and the effort that goes into either form-based code or design guidelines are very similar. And design thinking is similar also. All of that you saw there, if you're familiar with the previous project, is all codified into the form-based code document, which consists of both graphic and also visual formats. Looking at the Littleton Station area vision plan, the image on the right is a zoom in of the lots and larger parcels that are north of the station, which we understand to be maybe where we might look at a first draft of the design guidelines. We've also looked at some of the kind of ideas and visions for the maybe build out of the area with respect to their uses, whether mixed use or apartments or sort of smaller scale cottages and townhomes. We've also recognized that there have been a lot of work that went into that planning vision document, some of which are kind of the preferred building scales and is that people at Littleton have specified. This is also, or one advantage for us anyway, is that we're very familiar with many of these examples. Some of them were actually examples used in the form-based.
Yeah, I think just to back up for a second, if you understand the work that went into this plan and look at these images, and then look at the previous slide, which has the illustrative plan, which is the image on the left. We could glean from that plan and the kind of the visual preferences that are presented in the next couple of slides. We could almost draft a kind of early rule set about what design guidelines might be. If you go to the next slides, Jesse, just as an example, we could say that one design guideline is that buildings should be 2.5 stories tall with an occupiable half a story and a pitched roof. And we could establish that as a guideline, which is consistent with both these examples and the kind of quality of the plan on the previous page. So I think, unlike the Littleton Common process, which required some planning that we also did before we could get to the kind of code writing, the design standards, the work's already been done if this document represents a kind of consensus about maybe what's appropriate here. And so I just wanted to remark on that relative to what a process might look like that we do, that if this represents a good sense about what would be acceptable, I think we could hit the ground running, kind of writing some early drafts that point back to some of this material.
Yeah, exactly. And we've plenty of resource looking at preferences for lower scale, smaller scale residential buildings like townhouses or cottages, duplexes, as well as slightly larger in-scale apartments that are 2, 3, 3.5 stories. So that's so what might this design guidelines document, what it might actually look like. We looked at an example from Linfield that we feel is comprehensive, but also well formatted and very clearly illustrated. This document, here's the table of contents, kind of lays out the different topics that are in the guidelines. The most important of which I've highlighted here are going to be streets and sidewalks, buildings and their scales, placement of open spaces, as well as kind of parking. We see these 4, the minimum kind of design guidelines should definitely address these 4 or have specificities with respect to these 4 topics.
At the same time, this document has things that might not be necessary in the overlay, like signs, that you have an existing process for sign review. There are a lot of qualitative things in these design guidelines that I think would be harder for a planning board to review and enforce. So I think Jesse's right. Those 4 components that he's got highlighted, which are a subset of the issues that are in here probably would be the minimum things that you would want. And we could fold some aspects of landscaping in both the buildings, the open space, and the street and sidewalk section instead of having a separate section. I'm mindful that we want to write guidelines for you that are the minimum that get the results that you want. I think in some cases this particular example has aspects to it that maybe go beyond enforceability and usefulness. And we're also mindful that we want the guidelines to be well received by the real estate market too. We don't want to make draconian guidelines that might thwart, good transit-oriented development happening near the station. So we'll keep an eye on maybe how the market would perceive the guidelines as well. Not with any kind of hard market analysis. We don't have the resources to do that, but just based on our experience being developer architects too.
Yeah, the next couple of slides are just examples of what those different topics might look like. Both written out and also illustrated. For example, here a street section representing some of the guides around, how wide should streets be, how, the minimum width of a sidewalk, and all of that relative to heights of adjacent buildings. So that's streets. Buildings might have design guidelines around, as Tim mentioned, pitched roofs versus, placement relative to the street and different scales, breaking down the scale of a continuous facade beyond a certain amount of feet. In terms of landscape, again, where that might be placed relative to a project so that it's used and activated and contributes to the public realm and are easy to get to. Parking, both where it should be placed in general, but also maybe integrating sustainability features so that it minimizes runoff. So there's just some examples, and this particular document also has a summary that we feel is also very helpful. It's a really good resource that someone looking at a document could really kind of flip to as a set of summary at the end. So that's just a quick run through. We imagine that the next step might be, for us, outlining a scope of work for the design guidelines based on the funding. Drafting a timeline. We know that the town has a projected timeline that might be up for or might want to send this for a vote, potential vote next summer. Creating some kind of a public outreach strategy. Obviously working with the kind of virtual media that we have today, and also meeting with the planners of the plan that we're looking at, visions, and having some sort of download from them as well, so that we align visions and the goals. And that's pretty much it. This is just for discussion. Let us know if you have any questions.
Well, the first thing that is, we're looking at spring town meeting, so it would be finished by have it to the planning board so that we can share with the public early spring and have it ready for spring town meeting. So that's we're in October, so November, December, January, February. When's town meeting? April? It's May, but typically February we start putting warrants together after March. We need to have a rough idea by February so that hold out for the hearings. So we're looking at May town meeting. That you have summer. Do you think May we could get it in by May?
Well, I think it depends on how you design the process on your end in terms of decision making and the kind of outreach you want to do along the way. I think again, the planning work that was already done with an extensive kind of visual preference section, the site plan, if we can pivot off of that and that represents some consensus vision, then I think it's doable. If we need to go back to zero to figure out what people are going to be comfortable with, I think that the time frame gets a little bit more complicated. But that also will drive the cost of this process too, obviously. So I think probably the most efficient way to do this is that based on maybe your feedback at one more meeting about the content of the plan that we've been referring to, you tell us what you like or don't like or what you think can be supported in that plan. We would rush ahead and kind of draft out what the guidelines are as a kind of, a starting point for the conversation, and then kind of peck at that until we were happy with it, versus a kind of slow build, to the final result. I think we could do that based on our understanding of kind of pedestrian-friendly streets and the visual survey and the lessons learned from the Littleton Common process. I think that the graphics that we would use which wouldn't be a lot, it might, be 5 or 6 necessary illustrations, would follow more the graphic language of the Littleton Common project than the example that Jesse showed in Littleton, so that on the town side, there was some compatibility of look and feel between those documents. But of course, it's design guidelines and not hard zoning, so a lot of the kind of complicated dimensional requirements in the form-based code could be a little bit more generalized, I think, in this case. So sure, I think it's possible, but it all depends on the process and the feedback and how that goes.
Tim, I don't know if you've had a chance to really thoroughly read the vision plan, but we did conduct quite a bit of public outreach.
Right.
Between the survey and the meetings. So, I think that certainly can expedite. The fact that we already have that information can certainly expedite the process. At least that's our feeling on that.
I think the more this is seen as the logical conclusion of that process, and it's marketed as such, the better. And it doesn't seem like it's a standalone process, or it is. I completely agree, Lisa. I think that's an excellent way to frame this, and an excellent way to think about how we can expedite some of the decision making.
Budget number?
Yeah. How much is it going to cost us?
Is that? Well, I'll remind this group that the form-based zoning effort was $42,000, and I don't think it's going to cost that much, because that required a little bit more from scratch work we had to do. But I think it might be best for you to tell us what resources you have, and we can reverse engineer, what we propose. I mean, I know that it probably will require, a budget that involves a public-private partnership of some kind. Just eavesdropping on the last 10 minutes of your conversation before we join more efficiently. I don't know. You tell us the number first.
I have a question for this group, actually. Are we committed to designing everything? I mean, are there chunks of or types of areas that we would not want to delve into, or does it need necessarily to all be done now?
I think we were just looking at that one area, so we're not
Just the first one.
just the first area.
I think north of the station was what we talked about.
Right. Does that have all the? I can't remember. Does that have all the mixed use and residential and commercial?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think it's a great question, because I think that we want to set certain things. I'm going to throw out what I think should be in the guidelines and what shouldn't, just because we've been on the case for 3 days now, so I don't have a deep bench of considerations here. But I think it might be, it might include how tall, and so maybe it's 2.5 stories with some requirements about the pitches that are acceptable for a roof. I think maybe maximum building footprint per building, so we don't get things that are out of scale of what was in that site plan, but probably bigger footprints than what we, the maximum footprint at Littleton Common. They could be bigger footprints than that. We would help you figure that out. We would set requirements for internal kind of street/driveway, so they aren't too wide, but still meet, emergency access requirements, and that would prescribe sidewalks, lane dimensions, and dimensions where parallel parking makes sense where there's some commercial activity. But we wouldn't prescribe kind of development plans. We would leave that up to the market. But we would want to make sure that the buildings, their adjacency, their size, their kind of massing and character were compatible with what people in the town would anticipate based on that plan. And so the rule set, I would like to keep as simple as possible and let the market decide the site planning and the arrangement of buildings and, whether the road is straight or curved and all those things. I think that's probably the right way to go. And that has a positive impact on the cost of this effort too, right? Where we say, what's the limited toolkit that we need to have the market be responsive, but not end up with something that's going to freak people out because it's overscaled or too dense or skews one direction or the other. The other thing that I recommend, and I talked about this briefly with Elisa and Maren in our call last week, is that I think we should require a mix of residential building types so that we don't get a monoculture of either apartment buildings or single family houses. I think that it's my understanding that one of the aims of this is to encourage the market to build a larger diversity of housing types in the town, to give people who live in the town more options. If empty nesters want to sell their house and move into something smaller, and so I think townhouses, apartments, and single family houses should be on the table, but maybe in a mix so there isn't one that dominates. That's another quasi policy idea that we could just bake into the guidelines. If that makes sense. I see some very soft nodding with some of you, but I think that's one of the goals, right? That you've got a nice single family housing stock in Littleton. You want diversity of housing choices, but you don't want big gross apartment buildings. So in a way, that's our goal, to set guidelines to encourage just what everybody seems to want from the planning document. Is that, Matt, does that additionally answer your question? Yeah.
Tim, I appreciate kind of letting the market, can you hear me all right? Letting the market kind of bear out how we drive this. But the topography plays a huge role in this, because if the placement of a 2.5-story building closer to 495, whether that's the northerly side or the westerly side, I'm not exactly sure, but there's a good chance that we could accommodate a 3.5 or a 4.5-story building there and frankly not see it from Foster Street.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Chuck. Chuck, I'm all for. We could set some zones in the plan where you could allow for more height. We could decide that right in the plan and say, in this zone you can go to 3.5 stories, and in this zone you can only go to 2.5. I think that's a cool idea. To be honest with you, as long as if this group is representing in a way the community's probable reaction to what we come up with, believe me, I'm pro density near commuter rail stations. So we're totally willing to follow your lead, and I think that's where we might have some geographic specificity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, even the layout of the road, it's somewhat laid out already. If you walk the property, you can kind of get a feel for natural flow, if you will, and where the buildings could potentially be placed. And we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle together as of yet, but if everything does come together the way we'd like things to come together, I think that there's sort of a natural layout that lends itself to that parcel.
I totally agree, but I think it would be smart in the guidelines to take a half a step back from figuring that out and just have a line and still let the market mess around with some of those things. The good news is that the market will figure out how to work around topos and wetlands better than anyone else, right? So they're trying to minimize costs and maximize density. So we can be smart about that, but we want the guidelines at the end of the day to seem market friendly. Oh, look, it's just, there's 2 height zones. There's a couple of qualifications about building heights. We can't have buildings bigger than X. Otherwise, it's up to us. I think that sends a pretty good message.
Yeah, we might also have, sorry, I was saying, we might also have more geographic specificity around the area that's mixed use or immediately adjacent the station where it's most visible on Foster Street because the kind of parcel tucks behind a lot of lots behind Foster Street. So that might have buildings that are, have greater specificity, should be closer to the road to kind of engage the commuters that are coming off of the train, et cetera, versus the apartment buildings or the townhouses behind that might, have a different specificity or lack thereof.
Yeah, and that would have more of a residential look, if you will, to try to blend
Exactly.
better, yeah.
No, what I was gonna ask is whether you felt the Linfield, design guidelines were, really what you envisioned for Littleton, or do you feel like those were more complicated?
I think for me, they're more complicated than they need to be. And
That was kind of my gut, but.
they're suggestive of a kind of neo-traditional style without any teeth. Like quite frankly, they're a little bit ideological to me. And I think the town would be better served if the guidelines were more straightforward. They were thoughtful about scale and character, but through the more abstract kind of descriptors we use for Littleton Common Code. I think that there's a lot of adjectives and qualifiers in there that would make a planning board pull their hair out, right? Like, what does it mean, friendly to people? Isn't everything friendly? I mean, we went through this with Ed in the Littleton Common thing. He's like, don't make it clear and easy to use. Don't make us judge using adjectives. It's not helpful, huh? I mean, I'm sorry to be so editorializing maybe a little bit too strongly, but I'm imagining a slightly kind of tighter, cleaner document.
Okay.
Very pragmatic approach.
That's the plan.
So, Mara, you shared the funds that we think we have with UTO, correct?
Yeah, when I first sent the information out, I said, I think we have $10,000 to do the staff training for the form-based code plus the design guidelines, about 10,000 for those two. That means it's probably 2 for the training and 8 for this work. The initial, I'm going to tell on you, the initial feedback I got from Tim was that it's probably to do the Linfield type design guidelines, it's probably 12 to 15 in that range.
I think we said 25, Maren, not to negotiate
Okay.
live in front of your committee here. I mean, I like if you have 8, if the town has 8, and you could secure 15 from a property owner or 2 to set, that's, I mean, we do a lot of design review in municipalities in the Commonwealth, and the design review we do is all paid for by development proponents. So there are certainly avenues. I think you were discussing it when I got on the call to set up an account to do this. And 12 is tough, I think, to do this. I think 20 is doable, and we could scope it for 20 with, of course, there's going to be at least, I'm imagining 2 or 3 kind of touch points with some stakeholders in this process too. Maybe this is the point when the potential consultants leave the meeting again.
So we have,
It's a bargain. We did the Littleton Common for 42.
anyway,
Okay, well, if nobody else has questions, then thank you, gentlemen.
We would love to participate because I think this is, as you know, this is an important issue for the Commonwealth. There's a whole a former Boston City Councilor, I think his name is Josh Zachem, just started a nonprofit that's focused specifically on encouraging cities and towns along the commuter rail network to encourage, transit-oriented development and a little bit more density at the transit stop. So, we're generally in supportive of that policy, and so to be involved in a kind of groundbreaking project with a town like Littleton to kind of do a kind of model overlay for 40R seems really cool for us. So, we can, after you sort out your kind of budgeting and your solution for paying for this, we can make something work. So let us know.
Okay.
thank
All
you.
right, wonderful. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Okay, thanks so much.
So, Dodson Flinker is coming on now. Chuck, you had a question about the schedule. The room is taken soon?
I want this meeting going, we have interviews at starting at 6:30 for candidates.
Oh, wow.
Well, we're gonna be done in 20 minutes.
There you go.
Is this like we get another Zoom? I mean, this could. We could choose another room to have. No, we'll be done by.
Well, at the same time, I do want to give them equal.
Mine started soon, so I could stay till 7.
So why don't we,
Start with them, I don't think. The other thing is literally slider the laptops over to personal. This is one of the, what we're doing, we're putting one, 3 candidates, putting one in here, one in 207, one in 307.
could they put one anywhere else, or they have
Potentially.
to be there?
I'm just coming through.
What is, we've got 207, 206, and 307?
We've got 103, 233, and 307.
What time do you have, 6:30?
Yeah.
Do we hide your person somewhere else for 10 minutes? That's my, so 6:30 is me and somebody.
Yeah, you're here.
I
Candidate 1 and 103.
can walk over. So these guys are involved.
Okay.
This place.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Worked out well.
So what time will you guys be done?
Hopefully it'll be close to 6:30.
Okay.
But I just don't want to have one.
Because he's gonna walk right in here.
It's okay. When number one walks in there, do you not want us to see who it is?
I don't think you recognize him.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So this candidate has been advised to come into this door and not that door?
Correct. He's coming right here, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter's.
Okay,
Peter,
Peter, thank you, sorry for that. We're all yours. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
I have to admit you have me a little bit at a disadvantage. I didn't realize this was an interview per se. And I take it you're looking at other candidates and other proposals?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Well, what would you like to know? Do you want me to review the proposal or talk about our qualifications or what?
How about we start with what we're basing this off of the plans that you did with Judy Barrett for the train station, from what we already have in our books and everything else. How familiar are you with the area? We've seen some designs and some build-out scenarios and things like that. how detailed were you when you looked at all of this before you made those designs, and will you be able to work off of what you had to, if we decide to tweak those and bring something to town meeting that actually will involve zoning of what you designed?
Right. Well, as you know, that was a relatively short-term project. I mean, it took a while, but we had one big public meeting. We did several versions of a master plan, and it wasn't based on detailed site information. We used the best information we could from GIS to look at, where the wetlands and steep slopes were, to look at access points. We looked at a lot of other information that had been developed from the roadway studies and other information. But as you know, a lot of that stuff may or may not be possible based on site conditions, particularly the lack of sewer and the need to have on-site wastewater treatment. Then there's questions of water supply, traffic access, which was a big issue that came up for folks in the neighborhood, obviously, was the impact on traffic conditions. So we looked at, it was the kind of study where you look at all the information you can get easily, but you don't have the budget to look, do detailed engineering studies and so on. So given that, I think we were successful in showing and coming to some consensus on the type of development that would fit the site. So the question is, what is the extent that's actually possible, right? So I think, there's two ways to handle that. One way is you adopt a 40R district that covers the whole site and let the developer figure out what fits according to the density that you allow. And if they can show that they can provide wastewater treatment and water supply and the traffic won't be too great to handle on the local roads there, fine. Another way would be to do more detailed study as part of the planning and design and zoning process and figure out exactly what you want. Now, the advantage of that, which would basically be taking what we did and moving it forward, the advantage of that is that everyone would be able to agree up front as to what you were going to get and how much density was appropriate, et cetera. The disadvantage is you don't have a budget to do that and you don't really have the time. So I think in some ways the plan that we did, I think, is a good start in describing the overall layout and sort of appropriate uses on different parts of the property. But again, we don't know exactly what a developer would come back with. And I looked at some of the preliminary proposals that have been done for the site, and already in those, there's a number of different options. And some of them are a lot better than others in terms of design. So I think the opportunity here is to sort of do what Joe was involved with in North Grafton, where we did a master plan to show what's possible. And then the design guidelines that accompany the 40R district ended up pretty general, which I think was appropriate because there wasn't a real consensus of exactly what everybody wanted to see. So by keeping them general, the developer could come back and provide what they thought fit their needs in terms of the real estate market and the development costs. And the town can then judge it based on what the developer thinks rather than trying to come up with a preconceived notion of what's possible. So I think considering the site and the budget, that's probably more of the way to go with this one.
So wait, you're saying that we should go with more general guidelines and just kind of let the market do what it wants?
Well, I think the design guidelines can be fairly specific and they could say exactly what you want, but you're not going to have a specific plan, right? That says, we want you to build the street right here.
Right.
If you know, and I assume you don't want to go back and do more planning work on the site yourselves, or do you?
No.
Probably not.
What about time frame? If we took what we had and we went to the next level with it, with what you started with Judy with, is Springtown meeting still doable to give us the 102 version of what it started with?
Yeah, no, I think that's, we did a lot of work in terms of assessing the type of architecture and other features that the public was comfortable with. I did that as part of the report. I did a selection of sort of comparable projects that I thought was a good fit for the site. And I think there's a fair amount of agreement as to what generally the town wants. And we could pretty quickly, over the course of the next couple of months, put that together in a package that would let you move forward. All that, whether that is the successful approach depends on how much support there is in the town to adopt that concept. As
What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put together a bylaw with the 40R in it, hold public hearings on the planning board standpoint, and then we're going to find out when we go to town meeting whether people are going to embrace what we want to do out there or vote it down. And that's why I think we've decided to start with a smaller version of what can go out there so that we're not going to overwhelm people with too much out there. We're going to start with the one parcel, or actually it's 2 parcels. Let's start with that and try to move forward and see how the town's appetite is for higher density, for apartments, for independent assisted, senior housing, all of that whole mix out there, and see how the people ultimately is going to have to pass 2/3 vote at town meeting, or is it majority now?
It's still 2/3.
It's still 2/3, so we're still going to need 2/3. So our hope is to get something palatable from whoever we decide, then hold public hearings on it, and then find out in early May how we did.
right.
So it's nice that you've already done some design. You have some ideas what streetscapes go look like and things like that. Your drawings that you did before do kind of take into topography. The ones I saw we've got that ridge there. We want to put the high mass buildings behind the ridge to kind of minimize the effect of the people from across the street to see them. So, you did a fair amount of detailed work based on the GIS that you had in front. So
Yeah.
obviously it's going to involve feet on the ground out there as moving forward.
Well, what I also like is that Peter did include in his proposal a public workshop. So it gives us an opportunity to get feedback, input, halfway through the project. So.
Yeah, one of the advantages of Zoom is that you can do a public workshop as easily as you can do a committee meeting, right? You just sort of throw open the virtual door and ask people to come in. And we've been having, in the last 6 months, we've really figured out how to translate the usual public workshop package in terms of interactive sessions, small group sessions, polling and so on, from the real to the virtual. And actually, I think there's some advantages. We have gotten better participation by people who can't normally come out to meetings. It's a lot easier for parents to take half an hour out of their evening if they don't have to leave the house. And older folks don't have to drive in the dark to go to a meeting and so on. So that's been pretty successful. And we figured out how to do a lot of interesting things with polling and other online tools that let people sort of express their opinions in a pretty simple way. So I'm confident we could have some pretty effective public meetings, or at least as effective probably as the usual in-person meetings where the usual suspects show up. So what I'm conceiving, as you saw in the proposal, is that we would meet with you, sort of agree on an outline, agree on a sense of direction, and then come back with a detailed first draft, and then present that at a public workshop, then do a second drop, and then have a second public workshop or forum to present that. Again, you've been through this a number of times. You know how political issues can come out of left field and chase you all the way to home plate, or whatever your metaphor might be. I guess chase you into the dugout and down the stairs sometimes. So that I haven't really been keeping track of exactly how the political winds are blowing in Littleton these days, or whether people are aware of this project happening. So we would count on you to be participants in that process of outreach and engagement, I guess, to the extent that it's needed, because frankly, obviously, $8,000 is not enough for us to do a whole lot other than
So
produce the materials.
thank you. That brings up a good question. So I noticed in your proposal, you think you can draft these design guidelines, meet our needs and expectations for $8,000.
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing fancy, frankly, but
Well, what is
you're
that?
practical. You're a practical town.
I'm sorry?
You are a practical town. You don't want anything too fancy.
No. Well, we want it to be thorough, but.
Yes.
And we might have 8,000, who knows, you might have car wash.
I mean, we want to make sure we get exactly what we're looking for. So, Matthew, do you have any questions, Chuck?
No.
No questions.
I just wanted to apologize for Peter for not making him aware of what he's walking into.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that. That would be my fault.
Yeah, you just got a black mark for not having a suit on, Peter.
I know. I would have put on a tie.
That's it.
Yeah. We also know that a lot of the pictures, maps, renderings that we've been looking at are directly from the station area study, the vision study report. So that's a good thing.
The only comment I would make is frankly, it is important to follow the political climate, but we're tasked with trying to look at opportunities to develop this area. And that's something that has been, that political climate has already determined that the residents have said, we want this developed. So that's, as much as we need to keep an eye on where we can get funding and things like that, the determination as to whether or not this is an area we want to focus on, that's been determined.
Now it's our job to get it passed. Put it that way. Get the 250 people that are going to come to town meeting to vote for it.
Okay.
So I guess we'll
walk around later tomorrow.
Yeah. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
We'll be in touch.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Thank you. So are we done?
Well, let's talk.
Yeah.
So do you want to set us off this Zoom and talk privately?
It's still a public meeting.
Us there, start publicly? How would you shut the sound off?
So I am going to have to head off. I have to bring daughter to a physical therapy appointment. So I'll touch base with Maren after, or if there's going to be a follow-up discussion to discuss this further if there isn't sort of consensus.
Tonight.
Yeah.
So, Joe, do you have any input before you leave?
I think part of it is also identifying what I think both firms can do the job.
Right.
I think it becomes a question as far as what kind of money we want to pull together. If we feel that we need to try to pull from different areas and even approach property owners, then that may also have an impact on which consultant we go with. Especially since while Utilities is definitely strong on the design side, it seems like they'd be approaching it from more of a design side versus Dodson and Flinker also has experience on the bylaw side. So, and what they feel they could do as far as providing the town with a product. So I think we're at two different price points. I think part of it just depends on really like what we feel we can pull together some additional funds. And then what is the town's expectation as far as if you want it to be to really be more of a pictorial design guideline document and presentation that may lead you towards one more than the other.
Are both capable of doing that?
They are. It's just that, at least from my exposure for Formbase and knowing the work of Dodson and Flinker, Dodson and Flinker can absolutely do the design task. It's really then, one, you have a lot of experience with util as far as the form-based code, and maybe that's along a direction that you want to go with, versus maybe having to do more conceptual things that Peter was talking about. I think that's the approach. And you've had, with these firms, you've had two different experiences as far as the level of budget that each had to use, but then also the presentation and what sort of you feel works to support that zoning effort.
Go play chauffeur. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thanks.
I'll start. Well, I don't think Flinker, because they started, they've got everything there. They designed it. Everything we're looking at is their design. It's not the common, it's not form-based coding. It's an entirely different animal out there. They have an idea of topography. They have an idea of they've already, I guess the best way, we're not starting from scratch again with them. I think we've had some good renderings that they've done and everything else. And I think as far as the bio, they can probably write a pretty good bio. I think we can base it on Grafton, we can base it on Winfield. We can get all the detail that we want out of somebody else. We want to see a conceptual of what the density we're going to get, the maximum we're going to want, where we're going to want it, how we're going to want it. And there, where the other company's going to start with what they have already. That makes more sense. And I think they're a little more cost effective than the other ones. So my idea is to start with that.
If I can jump in, so I don't have to jump out.
Yeah.
I very much agree with you. I think that with Dodson Flinker, it's Peter, right? For all intents and purposes, which is kind of like moving a PT boat versus moving, I don't want to say
Util.
UCL. I actually think of the Unitel. Oh, Bloomberg. Oh, that's interesting. But it's not going to be, they're not going to use nickel. That's quick. And we've learned that with other engineering firms who do this on so higher than us. I think there's a little bit more polish or corporate or professionalism with UCL than with Peter. But I don't need to shine. I just want to make sure we get something done.
And I think we could probably add to this filter, maybe throw some more money at it. Even better for it. There's 22,000 in there using somebody else's stuff, And I feel like this, I don't think they've ever seen such. They don't know this is the part of the At least they knew that, yeah, we're going to put the building here because we're going to take it down to the slope. I think we would be better served and quicker. I'll take time is a reason, but I think we'll get a quicker product back that we can send start showing people because they've already done it.
You guys have been here for about. Is it a 5 number?
Four.
Well, okay. It's just that plus. Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I didn't mess up.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, okay. Matthew, what do you?
Like, you guys are way more versed in this than I am. I haven't worked in your thing. I'm weary of the low price, frankly, like that's just a gut reaction. And you get what you pay for, so it does seem like you might get less product out of Peter, but maybe that's okay. Maybe his approach is you need less, you need this instead of the full that UT's going to give us. So I don't feel strongly about it. I'm always a little nervous when someone's less than half of the other person.
I would be too if he hadn't already done.
Yeah,
this.
fair enough. So that's fine.
You know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
do know, yeah.
Molly, what do you think?
I'm comfortable working with either company. I was pleasantly surprised that Dodson Flinker came in at 8. That was the email I sent to both of them saying, can you put together a proposal for this time frame and this amount, and he came back with yes, and here's how we'll do it. I would imagine that Dylan Sussman, he's one of the guys that works for Peter. He was at in 2018 was it when we had the outreach for the or was it whenever it was?
Okay.
Yeah, whenever it was.
remember
Yeah.
those days.
Yeah, he helped lead some of those sessions.
Okay.
So I would imagine that we'll have him working on this. I was a little taken aback by what's his name? Tim Love's approach of how much do you want and how much do you have? I don't think Littleton's that. I'm not comfortable with that conversation. But that's.
Yeah, I mean,
I understand where it was coming from.
Yeah,
You know,
I
like,
mean,
it's like, hey, you want to do
kind of
this?
corporate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm in agreement with what you're saying. I think we could get this done a lot quicker, given that he's already done it. I think if we were just starting, if it was pre this, it'd be a totally different conversation. So, yeah, my vote would be for them, with the caveat that if we can find them, I want to make sure we get what we need.
I agree,
and
we need to get some more money.
Yeah,
I like the idea of having the developer kick in the rules up.
I do too.
And we can strongly.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure it's buttoned down and it's not just a lot of pretty pictures and, yeah, which you are great at that.
Right, so it's a document that the planning board, the special permit granting authority will be able to point to and help, and it'll actually help make decisions.
Yes, and it will guide developers so that we get what we want.
So not just this part.
Yeah.
We're gonna be able to replicate that if we decide to keep going up the street as well.
Right.
So it's gonna have density, it's gonna have the calculations. What density, what you're gonna get from it,
Well, and actually that would probably be a good first exercise. I think Peter said that was to scope what you want to have in the.
What we should do is have them come back with big plans that are already drawn, and we'll start with that.
But I also wanted to talk about design guidelines. Yeah, okay.
You're gonna want to do it, now that we've got all the little details we put in the form based up here, you're gonna wanna migrate that over here as well. I think
Yeah.
we all agree with that.
Okay.
Right, but as far as the design guidelines, you want them to include uses and building types, look and feel of the buildings, and location to some extent, landscaping,
Right.
parking.
Roadways, widths and sidewalks
Streets
and
and
stuff.
sidewalks, building, open space and parking. Yeah.
Right,
And
and I would be
Zoning
very,
Streets and sidewalks
Yeah.
anyway. It's how, what we want.
And
to look.
signage, because doesn't our signage in this town, isn't it really lax?
I wouldn't go do signage just for this site. I would,
Isn't that design guidelines?
We'll make them commit like we made the point.
right, but we could spend $10,000 just on signs and not, and then it's just signs.
You can't put basic guidelines in, like, you don't, I'm just, you don't want me, or whatever. Okay, all right, okay. Oh, all right, so it's adherence, okay. Okay.
So when are we gonna meet again then?
What do you want to shoot for?
You wanna see if they can come in and, you wanna do 3 weeks and have them give us a presentation of what their thoughts are? Because it'll be 3 weeks to bring in their drawings, bring in a rough draft. Where does that put us? Mid-November?
First week in November.
First week in November?
That's
Yeah.
a meeting. Planning board meeting that week.
And housing authority.
So, if we stick with Wednesday night?
So we meet, before we meet with planning board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like this 5:15, I really like that.
Okay.
So I can't, that Wednesday, I have housing authority starting at 5.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it's the first Wednesday of every month.
What about the
I
following?
have the same thing.
What's that?
Affordable housing trust?
That one isn't on, although it might
No.
happen, that one isn't on my calendar.
He's got housing authority.
Oh,
Housing authority, yeah.
all right.
What about the following?
That one is okay with me.
So that's a month from now.
That's correct.
Well, you better even further along. I don't think 2 weeks is enough
2
time.
weeks is not enough. What is, 3 weeks puts us at, Our planning board, well, we've already met on planning board. Sure, when's the first planning board meeting? Isn't it November like 5th or something?
It's the 5th, yeah.
Right.
Today's the 15th.
Today's the 14th. 1, 2, 3.
3.
3 is November 4th.
Yeah.
I mean, do we have to do it on Wednesday night?
Well, we can't do it on Thursday, we only planning board on Thursday.
Tuesday?
Want to do it Thursday and do it before?
We
planning
can't do it November 3rd, that's election day.
board? Oh, okay. You want to do it that Thursday before planning board? What time planning board?
That's November 3rd.
To Thursday, November 5th. We have probably a 3.5-hour agenda already.
Yeah, next week.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me circle back with Peter on his schedule, and if he can do 2 weeks, then we'll do 2 weeks. But otherwise, we'll come up with another time. Does daytime work at all?
I can usually make it work if I get some advance warning, yeah.
Yeah.
I can do it.
I could do
That's a
Wednesday.
good idea.
I could do Wednesday during the day. Yeah.
I don't know, Chuck.
So all that. Yeah. Okay. I won't schedule it without everybody
We
involved.
want him to try to count. And do a Zoom with,
Yeah.
if we can. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, doesn't that make more sense if he brings the stories and comments when he actually meets with us? I'm not saying he has to do it all the time, but maybe the first one, he's probably.
We should be able to do that, yeah.
Well, doesn't that make more sense?
Well, it's just with the number of people in the room. By the time you get Joe and him, then we've exceeded the maximum capacity of the room.
We have 6, is that 6 people in here?
Yeah.
That would be 6.
With Joe.
Joe.
We'll leave Joe out.
Oh,
Well, now we're just talking about format, so it's, we can get through that. Joe just told me that I should be able to plug in here, and you should be able to do a screen share so that you can see everything that he's sharing.
I don't get, you want him to stay there and do it that way we can do that. Whatever. Doesn't matter. You know, he's not gonna bring his beers there.
all right, so you'll let us know.
So the preferred is Dodson Flinker, and we'll schedule.
In 3 weeks, during the day is fine.
Cool.
Or we can do it at 7:15 after the housing authority meeting. Just saying, like, you have to decide now, let's just, I'll leave that up as an
Okay,
option.
yeah, that's good to
Yeah,
know.
we do it that way too.
Cool.
Sorry that it's so difficult. God, I know.
Well,
I know, right? So hard to do.
adjourned at,
So you get to interview somebody now?
Yeah, 3 people.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna go around and start calling.
adjourned at
Wow.
6:37, Delisa?
Oh, I'm sorry, I just zoomed out.
All right,
Real
thank you.
Adjourn? Someone else?
Yeah.